What was that like? What was that feeling like? Was it the first time you'd been blindfolded to go to an interview? And then once you're there in this cave, I mean, were you worried about being beheaded back then? Or was this just kind of the what you did in that part of the world if you wanted to interview
You know,
with someone like this?
I was tremendously excited, to be honest. I mean, we were not allowed to film any of this, and obviously, it was like
It was filmed
it's a
by their
cliche.
cameras. It was by Bin Laden's cameras, right?
We couldn't film any of the like what was happening to us, how we got there, all that. I
Mhm.
mean, it was very, of course, it was exciting. At the time, I was not worried because A, they'd invited us, and B, this is before they killed Danny Pearl, the Wall Street Journal
Mhm.
reporter who Al Qaeda essentially kidnapped and murdered in January of 2002. And then sort of the rules of the game change. It's going to be hard for younger people who are listening to this to remember that there was a time when journalists, aid workers, and priests, nuns, people were really treated in wartime as kind of they were non-combatants, and so if you were an aid worker, you didn't have to worry about being kidnapped, or if you were a journalist, you didn't have to be worried about being kidnapped or shot at or whatever. I mean, but those rules kind of changed, and obviously the ISIS made it even worse. But so I wasn't concerned about them doing anything to us. They it was their first television interview, so it would sort of be weird to then sort of do something to us. Clearly, they were very concerned about did we have a tracking device, and if they found one on us, I think they would have definitely that would have been very bad news for us. But we didn't have one, and the interview proceeded, and he was very very low key, and he declared war on the United States. So it was the first time he'd done so to a kind of Western audience. It was his first TV interview. He spoke in Arabic, even though he speaks English, because he wanted to be very precise about what he was saying in his native language. And people around him treated him with a lot of respect, and they kind of called him the Sheikh, and they hung on his every word. And he delivered this interview, and we it was the middle of this, probably 3 o'clock in the morning by the time he left, and we went back to our hotel and went back to the United States, and we edited the interview, and it went out, I think, on some early May 1997. And it kind of just went out, and it just landed with a thud because, no one knew what to make of it, because
Right.
it was sort of, he hadn't done anything yet.
Mhm.
And there were people at the US government who were interested in him, but it was a very small group.
Yeah, I want to ask you about them later. It's a
Yeah.
fascinating cast of characters, and you talk to a lot of them in the Manhunt documentary, and you talk about a lot of them in this book as well. So, did you realize, even though that the interview didn't, he hadn't done the East Africa embassy bombings yet, there was no Cole yet. Obviously, there's no 9/11 yet. Did you realize what you had and who you had been talking to, and what his capabilities were going forward? Because wasn't it the first time that he on television really declares war against the West? And so, did it sink in how significant he was as a person, and the movement he led? How much of an impact that was going to have on the future, or what? Or did you just go on to the next assignment?
No, I mean, I thought it was, look, I put a lot of effort into making this happen, and we had put a lot of effort. My colleagues, CNN, my bosses at CNN, who I must credit, Pam Hill and the late John Lane. We went in '93, and they gave, it was very expensive, and it was very lengthy, and it was very uncertain about what was going to happen. And we made this documentary, and then I went back to them in '97. I said, "There's a guy Bin Laden. I think he's behind the Trade Center attack in '93," and they didn't know who Bin Laden was, but they had a lot of faith in me and us and the process. They let us go and do it, so to their credit, but because he had actually done some things, but we weren't aware of them, and
Mhm.
he actually mentioned them in the interview, and I didn't even know what he was talking about. At one point, he talked about this victory in Aden. Now, years later, I kind of worked out what he meant, which is his guys had bombed 2 hotels in Yemen, in Aden, which were housing American servicemen who were on their way to Somalia. The bombs had killed a tourist. No American servicemen were killed. We didn't know that had
Mhm.
happened, but
Right.
mentioned it in the interview. So now I was puzzled by this reference for a while. But so that's all by way of saying he made all these threats, but it wasn't clear to us that he was going to do anything about it. It was only, pretty much a year later, August 7th, 1988, when he blew up 2 U.S. embassies in Africa, and then it was clear to anybody that he was a real problem, because not only did he kill, he killed 212 civilians. He had no compunction about it. There was no warning. A number of them were Muslims, because Kenya and Tanzania, where the bombs went off, have big Muslim populations. He killed 12 Americans and 200 Africans. He didn't have any problem about it at all. And usually, it's the interesting thing about terrorists in the past is that they try to avoid, these mass casualty attacks, because they could backfire, lead to a crackdown. You might lose your support, any support you might have. And Bin Laden just didn't care about any of that. So that from that point forward, it was clear that he was a serious problem. But even then, because he hadn't attacked in the United States, a lot of, once the Clinton administration responded, the Bush administration came in, they were they just didn't see Bin Laden as a big deal. And, which is strange, because, we now,
there's a growing body of evidence for sure that you cover in this book and your other ones for sure. And, that's what I'm hoping that, everybody should read this book. It's just fascinating, especially where we are now at this next turning point, essentially, in the history of our United States relationship with Afghanistan. So bringing an understanding of that based on all your years of study is so vital.